G'day guys, today we had on Coach Nick McCallum onto the show, and if you have ever had an injury or problem with your body, here's the guy to see, here's the guy to listen to. This podcast was insane. It literally blew my brain, and he's got a client out of me. Like seriously, it was absolutely wild. If you guys are interested in what I do as coaching, I would strongly recommend heading over to my Instagram and sending me a message. I run a program called Overcome the Chaos, which essentially helps people be, especially men, be the best versions of themselves, especially if they're at that point in their life where they're experiencing burnout, they've started to have success, they're sacrificing their health or their relationships to push themselves further. Send me a message and I'll get back to you and let you know some of the stuff. So if you really enjoyed this podcast or you get anything out of it, like please hit that subscribe. That would be awesome. And without further ado, I bring to you Coach Nick McCallum, and this podcast is seriously, put your thinking cap on and get ready because this was an absolute ride. I hope you enjoy as much as I did. Nick, you stud. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Nah, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be on a podcast for the first time.
We're breaking his podcast virginity today.
Literally my virginity is being lost.
How's the feel, man?
I hope you feel proud, bro.
Today I do, for sure.
Nah, it's good to be here, and it's it's awesome to talk about some stuff that's whatever's relevant.
Yeah, man, because you've been like mastering your craft. I've heard so much about you specifically since moving to the Gold Coast from like friends and athletes and stuff like that.
That's
and
good.
Yeah, man, I just love to know, what have you been learning recently? What are some new stuff that you've just been like, this is great?
Yeah, it's it's interesting. Like I find probably in the last 6 or so years has probably been the fastest development from my business standpoint. But it probably comes just having a variety of individuals to work with. It's been a vast number of people that I've come in contact with that I've learned from their bodies, and then being able to apply things that I feel as though is relevant to them. Like in the industry, in the fitness industry, like particularly, there's a large emphasis around obviously individuality. Everyone wants to make sure that everything's individual, but a lot of the time, the industry trends sort of take away that individuality, and people lose the ability to critically think for people themselves, particularly around assessing someone's body and learning from their body and their past and what their past looks like and how they've currently got to the situation they're in, whether it's injury, whether it's failed performance and they're no longer in a sports team because of their failed performance, or whatever that may be. It's identifying, I guess, the flaws within their current approach that's hasn't allowed them to progress, whether that's being injured or not getting selected or whatever that may be. And I guess that's what I've done, and I've had a few mentors along the way that have certainly helped me, get to that position, including Ian King was a big contributor to that. He, 4 decades, 30 different sports at international level.
What?
Crazy. 10 Olympic cycles he was involved in, named the Romanian deadlift, or contributed to naming the Romanian deadlift, named the back extension, removed the emphasis of hyperextension and called it a back extension, because he was sort of didn't understand why people were calling something that they don't tend to want, going into hyperextension. So, and then developed the single leg RDL and the King deadlift, and then speed of movement, and then the lines of movement, which is everyone's familiar with, quad dominant, hip dominant, or horizontal push, horizontal pull. And he sort of characterized exercises and made individuals understand that there is a rationalization between why we do something, and gave individuals a little bit more of a greater need for developing hypotheses with an individual before just going, hey, here's a program, take the program, off you go kind of thing. And I guess all I've done is my job is, if an athlete gets a extended 20-year career as a result of what I've done, I've done my part. So,
that's a good result though, bro. Jesus.
I think it's sort of lost where we pass individuals on to the rehabilitation therapist and off they go sort of thing, and then they come back to the coach and they continue to complete that circle of like function, dysfunction, and they think that it's like they're eventually going to get out of that cycle, and it's because they're not identifying the problems within the approach itself that leads to them constantly going in circles and eventually getting spat out and off to the surgeon and their career's done. So often in individuals, if you see the imbalance, they've either had the injury or they're about to have the injury. And I guess my job as a coach is to identify the imbalance and then understand that that individual has a pre-existing condition. And if we change it, we immediately positively influence the athlete. you know, if I don't leave it. So most people these days have had strength training by the time they're 15. You know, someone's been exposed to strength training, which is crazy because when I started training, you know, I think I was one of the only ones in the training environment at 15 years old that was that young. You know, now everyone's doing it. So really these days is someone got a clean slate to start with. So, you know, you can either, by the stage they get to me, they've already had 2 or 3 years of strength training, which may be negatively influencing their body.
Yeah, because they would have like had certain conditioning for learning that for a period of time.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, we need to tweak this.
You know, and even within running sport, you know, most running sport athletes are quite dominant athletes, and then they go into the training environment and you look at their first exercise. It's usually a squat, a lunge, or something to that extent. So you've got life imbalances or sporting imbalances magnified by the training decisions that you create. And that's just how the spiral of downfall, you know, if we don't address that, you know, it's one thing to take on an athlete and have the athlete have no existing pre-existing conditions, but then as a result of you training them, you to then decline them, that's a big problem, you know, like, and that's what's happening globally, in my opinion, currently. Well,
why is that?
I think it's just a combination of, you know, it's the industry trends that, you know, a piece of information is usually published for commercial interest. Someone wants to make money out of you know, selling equipment. And so we attach information bias towards that piece of equipment, and that goes, and this is nothing against the hip thrust, but take the hip thrust, for example. There's a certain individual marketed the exercise, lay down some information. Now we've got, you know, every single female in the gym thrusting thin air and loading their hips in a way that, you know, they may not have the ability to be able to selectively recruit, you know, their abdominals and their glutes to extend the hip. But now they've got this emotional attachment to hey, I need this exercise to grow my glutes. Whereas there's 1,001 different other exercises which also, you know, aren't mid-range glute exercises. They're fully lengthened, you know, glute exercise. You put the glute in a fully lengthened position, such as like a back extension, an RDL, or a deadlift variation, etc. But they've sort of been glossed over because someone's now sold a commercial piece of equipment called XYZ. Don't sue me.
It's trendy to do as well.
It's trendy, yeah. You know, and if the athlete is predispositioned already to having, you know, say an anterior rotation, now they're going into hip extension or trying to go into hip extension with an anterior rotation, then we see, you know, back, you know, all kinds of issues stem from just that position. Then you couple that with a whole bunch of quad dominant athletes already who may, you know, be prioritizing quad based exercise at the start of the workout, at the start of the week, and then going and sitting in an office for 6 to 8 hours a day, and they wonder why their hips are shortened and their pelvis is rotating forward. And then, you know, so if we don't understand the athlete's past, we have very little ability to be able to influence their future. And that's, I guess, what I've been able to do is by deeply understanding and assessing the individual's past training history, we're able to catapult them in the future. And there's no difference between back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. They used to sort of think that it was like performance increasing rehabilitation. So every 6 months you're either fixing an issue or trying to increase performance. Well, there's sort of no real difference between those two things, because if you're not addressing a problem, you're declining from a performance standpoint, you know? So it's like the rehab's not being done accordingly because they're not actually integrating back into what they need to be doing to reverse the issue in the first place. You know, so if the joint's compromised to begin with, you never fix the problem in your program decisions, you're always going to end up back in that same cycle. And that's the problem with most athletes, is they get in a performance-based environment where they're high performance, or they're at a young age, they're placed into a training environment that they're influenced. Like most athletes who are at high performance or AIS or whatever they're at, they get plucked at, say, 16 years old and told that they're going to be something great. And that's fantastic, but now they're influenced by that individual or that organization forever, you know? And so if they fall out of that because of injury, their only way to get back is to do some rehab, then go back to those same decisions that cause them to have the problem. So there's been cases where individuals I've had to work with have had to run a secret ops kind of mission on the side, where I say, just walk around the gym and just pretend you're lifting stuff, you know, pretend you're picking stuff up and walk around and just do nothing, because, you know, the decisions that they're making is clearly declining your body. And we've got to try and reverse that and then try and integrate a way of thinking that's, you know, going to change the athlete's body in a positive way.
Nick, I've got this problem in my hip, man. Can you look at this real quickly?
God damn. Didn't know this was going to be a work off.
God damn it, we're live work off here. Here we go. Well, what we can do, man, is we can tell you're quad dominant. Well, what are some of the most common things that come from, you know, people being quad dominant? Because I just find that it's very common if you're running, like whatever it is, like a lot of people, it seems to me, like in my world, a lot of people quad dominant, myself.
So a lot of athletes, when I first start working with them, they have to earn the right to do the two things they've done the most of, generally speaking. And that's, if you look at most training programs, it favors horizontal pushing and quad dominance.
Bench press and squats.
100%. And then what do we lead with at the start of most people's workout?
Squat or bench press.
Bench press, yeah. And so we see the most common thing that's done the most, which deteriorates the body the most, which has led to the front of the week, the front of the workout. You know, and that's just a powerlifting influence that someone once upon a time said that the most metabolically costing exercise should be the first thing. Now, if the athlete's got asymmetries or imbalances from left to right or front to back, or, you know, isn't exactly identical from side to side, then putting a high bar or a low bar squat at the front of the workout, the front of the week, is probably not the best thing, you know? And everything's on a continuum. My mentor Ian come up with the lines of movement continuum in that regard. And you know, the differentiation between quad and hip dominant is based on the trunk angle. If the trunk is vertical, you know, and the most vertical exercise, in my opinion, and you place the load to the front of the body, is a front squat, you know? So, you know, if your trunk is in a vertical position, that's going to be the most quad dominant influence. But as the trunk angle increases in more than 45 degrees, you involve more of the gluteals, more of the hamstring. So if the athlete's already predispositioned to having quad dominance in their sport, you know, the mode of specificity, and there's that common thing that people talk about as being sport specific. Now, I don't know about you, but the most specific thing to me swinging a golf club is me swinging a golf club. You know, I don't know about you, but me passing a rugby ball, the most specific thing I can do is pass a rugby ball. So now I've got athletes, you know, passing rugby balls on Swiss balls and passing weighted rugby balls and learning how to throw, you know, with rubber bands and that stuff. So we're recreating the imbalance that we're already applying in the sports environment, in the strength training environment with load, which is the fastest way to magnify an issue. So you've already got the sporting imbalances. The athletes, maybe if they've swung a golf club, you know, one way for 20 years, they've got rotational imbalances to one side for 20 plus years. Now you're adding load to that. You know, we wonder why the athlete blows apart, you know? So it's one thing to be specific, but there's a mode of maybe needing to be non-specific at a period of time to reverse the imbalances the athlete has. And as a result of that, now we actually change the joint relationship. And maybe as a result of that, we optimize function, and as a result of that, the performance increases, you know? So if we decline the athlete's function, the discussion about being specific or non-specific is irrelevant. We just have to optimize the function first, and then the taking care of themselves. And if you look at most rugby, or take rugby union for example, is athletes, you know, putting rugby or running sport in general, there's an influence of horizontal displacement. The sport itself is majorly horizontal displacement. Unless you're taking up and under and you're coming up off the ground and you're jumping, then that's vertical displacement. So think about vertical displacement versus horizontal displacement. What is a squat? It's vertical displacement, right? A deadlift is horizontal. So do I like a deadlift for an athlete who's a running sport athlete? Commonly, yes. Why? Because the immediate starting position of a deadlift is very similar to the starting position of a run, you know? And so the trunk angle is relevant. And then obviously as the need of more vertical displacement as the run continues and as they get to the greater end of their max velocity, it does become with relevance to a squat. But if we're constantly leading with a squat, we may be deteriorating the athlete because, you know, they've already favored the quad, you know, within their running sport, you know. And the other thing is when an athlete runs, how wide are their feet?
Oh, there's no width.
No width. So why does most athletes squat outside shoulder width? You know, there's...
But they should be doing lunges.
Well, maybe, but in the sense of... And that's still leading to the influence of the quad. But, you know, when an athlete runs down the field, their feet are very narrow. Us taking a wide stance with our feet externally rotated, you know, does an athlete need external rotation in their run? No. Have you ever watched an athlete run? They don't externally rotate. You know, so you know, and then the influence of running on sand is a bigger problem. You know, you run on sand, yet the modality that you use, or the surface, that you use to train the athlete on may now be deteriorating the athlete's ability to run also, you know. So you've got a combination of things as the way you train the athlete, but then also the surfaces that you train the athlete on. So you may need to be, the sort of relevance for specificity is if you take stretching, for example. If I tell you, Corey, to go stretch say your hip flexors in your chest right now because you're doing a lot of podcasts, you're sitting down for a long period of time, and then you're sitting in this position, and you're also sitting with shortening your hip.
How do you know where my injuries are?
How long's the left shoulder been sore for now? But and if I go tell you to do that, that's relatively non-specific. I can give you a relatively random stretch, and it could be somewhat specific to you as an individual. As we go down the continuum, strength needs to be a little bit more specific to you. But if you do strength training tomorrow, it's not going to negatively impact you the next day. It might, but it's not going to necessarily change your life tomorrow. But say if we go run in a particular way that may negatively decline us, the fastest way to decline an athlete, add acceleration, add change of direction, add max velocity, add an impact with another player, we're in trouble, So if then the athlete goes into that with some pre-existing conditions, like if your left shoulder goes into contact right now, you might pop that, because the lateral edge is being exposed, and maybe you have more internal rotation on the left side and you're sitting a little bit more elevated on that left side. So if we go into contact with that, that's a pre-existing condition. If I don't fix that as a coach, the athlete's compromised, and so it's more than just going, hey, I don't really relate. If my numbers are going up in the gym, I haven't just done my job. If I've created an imbalance and now the athlete's compromised, now they're truly going to be compromised when they go out in the sports field. And the numbers that an individual or an athlete lifts in the gym is really irrelevant to how they perform in the sports field. And that's been misinterpreted. But the industry is still a very young industry. I think it's about 52 years old. I think Bodybuilding was in Lincoln, Nebraska, was the first coach to be paid to coach strength athletes. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I think, it's about 52 or 53 years old, the industry. So we're still learning, it's still very, but I don't want to make that excuse for athletes and their bodies, I don't want to make, hey, no, we're still only in our fifth decade of this, there's no point doing that for athletes because they're going to wonder why their career fell in tatters. But it's just, unfortunately that most strength training that most individuals are doing are negatively influencing the athlete's body, and then they're declining from a skill standpoint. So people sort of often look at athletes and go, I wonder why he's not as good as what he used to be 5 years ago. It's like, well, maybe if you had a little bit of a closer look at the way the athlete's trained over the last 5 years, we can peel back the layers. Now we look at the athlete's joint relationship and how their body's now being compromised. Now, as a result of the way they've trained, their skill has actually declined in that period of time. So it's one thing to understand, okay, the athlete's getting stronger, but is the strength in the short term relevant now that the athlete's exploded in the long term? So they might get faster and stronger in the short term, but as a result of the way you've trained them, they've now exploded in their body.
It just comes down to literally like everything you do is so important. Like the mindful of training and really understanding your body and awareness of that is like so critically important.
Yeah, and if you walk around the supermarket, you can quickly have a look at someone's body. I went to the shops the other day and I looked at a mannequin with a t-shirt on it, and the mannequin was sitting there and it was like this. It was internally rotated and had hyperextension of the knees, and I was like, that's the way we're now fitting clothes to mannequins. So it's that's now the example of how individuals' bodies look, so because of the popularity of strength training, and it's fantastic that people have learned how to lift more load and how to, strength training, that's great that people are getting in the gym at a young age and looking after their health, but as a result of the way they're training in the short term, in the long term, they're now breaking,
I may want to recorrect my posture a little bit.
We're going to do a full stretching session after.
So what are like the most common things that you see that people see, and what would be like, because obviously it's, as you mentioned, so individualized, but just commonly, what's like the most common thing you see, then what's like the most common solution when you're like, oh, this is again, you need to do this, and then you're like,
so probably when in a big circle, that last question, but when someone comes to see me, when I said there's a major influence of the quad and the horizontal pushing muscles, so the chest and also the quad and the hip flexor length, my firm belief is that the length and tension of the hip flexor, in my opinion, it determines the health of the lower body. If the hip flexor length and the tension is compromised, I tend to see the health of the lower body, including the lower back, being compromised. And for the health of the lower body to be good, I want no back pain, I want no hamstring strain, I want no calf pain, I want no groin strain, I want nothing. I want no sense of pain in the lower body. And the role that the abdominals play in that relationship is if the abdominals, aren't being trained in a way that's fortuitive of the pelvic position being in a strong position. Now, people just assume that you can train your abdominals by doing the big three. Now that's, the biggest load of crap I've ever heard is you're not training the function of what the abdominal's main purpose is, and that's to stabilize the pelvis. And if you aren't doing that, you may be compromising your lower body health and also your performance in your lower body. So in my opinion, 99.9% of individuals should train their abdominals before they strength train. For that reason, in terms of the health of the lower body.
Every time they strength train, you reckon?
I believe so, yeah. And the fact that it's done last is a reflection of the industry trends, is the way that we've decided that, it's another mentor of mine is Tudor Bompa, and Bompa's theories of methodology of training was he developed 5 laws, and the number one law was develop joint flexibility, and the order of priorities of sequence is develop joint flexibility first. And that's going against the major popularity of most people, what they love to discredit stretching as being this thing you can't do before strength training. Now, there's going to be some people probably listening to this going, oh, you can't stretch. You can't stretch before you train, you'll be weak. Well, I want you to try and apply the study that they applied with that in a practical environment. Because when an athlete walks in a strength training environment, my athletes don't go straight to the squat rack and start squatting. My athletes will spend 30 to 45 minutes, if not an hour, if they have the time, to prepare their bodies from a stretching, flexibility, tension reduction, whatever they have to do. They have an individual flexibility guideline to follow to try and change the condition of their joint prior to training. And when they walk into that training environment, they already have a conscious competence or somewhat unconscious competence, a level of understanding as to how compromised they are and where they are. So they know what they have to do to change their position of certain joints. Bompa's next law was develop the tendon and ligament health next. And so again, if you change the position of the joint, you change the position of the way that the joint now innovates with the rest of the body, is now you may be influencing the way the tendon innovates as well. So if then his third law moves on to the abdominals and then the smaller stabilizer muscles before the prime movers. Now think about most program designs is you lead with the largest movements first, whereas if you maybe deprioritize the larger movements for a period of time, and it's obviously individual specific in terms of if their overall annual year of their training, if they have a competition, say powerlifting, if the powerlifter stays in his powerlifting specific lifts all year round, he may be compromised. But if he comes away from those powerlifting movements, whether it's placing them at the end of the workout or the end of the week, they may now be in a better position when they come back to the competition phase to be able to lift greater load and have a better, the good powerlifters, Ed Cohen, Kaz, all those guys, what do? In the GPP or the generalized part of the year, the part of the year where they're being less specific, they go from being in the competition phase a wider stance squat to the in the competition phase being a wider stance squat and the generalized phase being a narrower stance. Why? Because there's a significant amount of hip wear and tear the wider the stance. And that's not my problem. That's their problem they got to live with for the rest of their existence. But, but now in most training environments is what do you see is really wide stance squats because the load potential in that position is higher, but yet it doesn't teach them maybe the flexibility that they need to squat with a narrower stance. So then, going down the continuum on that is other things that you commonly see is a larger emphasis on the horizontal pushing muscles and that being prioritized the front of the week because every male wants a big chest. But because of the way they've maybe prioritised their chest training, now they've dehypertrophied their ability because of what they've done over a significant period of time. Now they have large amounts of internal rotation. Take an example, Aaron Pilates, IFBB Pro, loved his chest, loved training chest. Unfortunately, it was one of his lagging body parts. So psychologically, he thought, hey, I need to train more of that. As a result of doing that, more internal rotation and more, protraction of the shoulder and leading to that position, he also was driving concrete trucks with a Sparky and did multiple other businesses. And as a result of all his life, riding motorbikes was in this shape, and so when it comes to trying to grow his chest, it's not a very good position to try and grow your chest from, when you're in that sort of internal rotation, kyphotic position. And so he had declined his hypertrophy potential. So being too specific for a long period of time, not only declined his ability to grow a muscle, it's also led to a shoulder injury, and so then you can imagine if you simply look at that for what it is, the physical therapy that had been applied for that individual was being really non-specific as well. Hey, lie face down in a massage and get your back rubbed. Well, just looking at your program design, take one look at your program design and we can see where the tension reducing activities should have been prioritized, not at the back, the front. So unfortunately the way that physical therapy is being done globally, I would say, is really non-specific to the athlete's needs most of the time. And it just takes one look at the athlete to be go, I think his shoulder's being pulled forward. Maybe he should be released from the front, not the back. And that's really commonly missed is if an athlete's been prioritizing certain variables in the training environment. And what I say is when a physical therapist doesn't really integrate back into the athlete's needs, is they're not considering how the athlete integrates back into what they're actually trying to achieve. They just think, hey, I've got this athlete for the next 15, 20 minutes, and I'm just going to treat what I feel as though might have a beneficial effect in the short term. You know, they might walk out feeling okay. But I've heard physical therapists treating an individual, and then they tell them to go put ice on their shoulder for the next 2 days. It's like, I want immediate transfer. When an athlete walks out of my office, I want them to feel instantly different. There should be instant change. There should be transfer from what we've just done. And I have a saying is, if the physical therapist, if you're not there within 2 weeks, you should run. Because you find out really fast if something's working or it's not working. There's immediate transfer. So I want fast transfer, and I say that physical therapy in Australia generally is too slow. And I've heard physical therapists in this country say they look forward to an ACL tear because it gives them a year's worth of work. And that's the reality of the current condition of the way that most people think around injuries. It's a period of time that they just go, oh, well, injuries just happen. Well, I don't think injuries just happen, because through my career and through my mentors and other individuals that I've been associated with, we've sort of come to this conclusion that there is things that can, give you insights into the athlete's, their pre-existing conditions. And if you don't act upon that, there's two types of injuries. The injury that's either happened or it's about to happen. If you don't identify that, then you're in trouble. If I'm looking at your left shoulder right now, that's a pre-existing condition. If I don't address that, you're in trouble. So from an athlete preparation perspective, is if we don't do something about that, down the road you might get compromised, and that's now my fault. And there's not enough people in this country putting their hand up and saying, oh, the way that I train that athlete, take AFL for example. How many athletes blow their ACL annually in that sport?
Oh, you hear it all the time. It's all ridiculous.
So now an athlete just literally takes a step off his right foot and his ACL blows. And they'll say, oh, it's just the nature of the sport. Well, is it? I didn't realize that running in a different multi-directional sport just creates ACL tears. I once had an athlete go to me, oh, I've got a bad knee. And I go, oh yeah, you got bad knee, yeah? And she sort of goes, yeah, playing hockey, bad knees. I said, oh, interesting. I played hockey as a younger kid, played multiple different running sports. I never got a bad knee from it. And she goes, no, playing hockey consistently for a long period of time just makes bad knees happen. I said, oh, out of interest, do you see anyone for your bad knees? And she goes, oh, I see a physical therapist. Oh, how long have you been seeing him for? Oh, 9 months. Oh, is it feeling any better? Oh, yes and no, it has its days. I said, out of interest, do you see a personal trainer? Yeah, I do actually. Oh, in the lower body days, what do you prioritize? Squats, lunges, leg press, maybe a hip thrust. And and out of interest, when you go see your physical therapist, what do you prioritize in that? He dry needles my glute and my hamstring. Oh, interesting. So he's not even releasing the muscle that you're using primarily the most, which is the quad. So it's, you start seeing a bit of it's almost like your eyes are open. It's red pill versus blue pill kind of mentality. It's like, I can show you what your life has looked like to this point, or you can decide whether or not you change. So it takes a bit of time for the athlete to come to conclusion that the decisions that they've made or someone's made for them is a result of the situation they're in. But once they get past that, they sort of go, okay, well, what Nick is highlighting to me is that I actually have control over the variables that influence my situation.
Yep. Dude, how did you get those mentors, man? Like for you, because that's vastly separating you from like the other stuff, because you're so ahead of the game.
Yeah, so Ian's phenomenal in what he's done in his career and how he influences individuals to think. But I was compromised myself. I come over here from New Zealand at about 19 years old, and I started playing cricket again after a year off. I competed in bodybuilding. And I realised really quickly I wasn't going to go very far in bodybuilding. I was a cricketer and a closet bodybuilder. And so I realised that was not going to happen. So I tried to reverse some of my own training decisions. I was like every other kid, in their teens, wanting to, grow a bit of muscle and then also wanted to play running sport. But I didn't realise that the way that I was training was deteriorating my body. So then I, as a result of the individuals, I work with directly myself to help with my own body, I got put on to Ian's work, and then I come across this way of thinking that I found a lot of people weren't seeing. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people not seeing what I see now. And then for a while there, I was trying to influence a lot of people to start thinking the way I was thinking. I was realizing that was creating, it was threatening people's morals.
Yeah.
It was upsetting a lot of people that I had this different approach. So, and if you're comfortable in your direction, other directions don't really upset you, and that's something that most individuals tend to struggle with is they see someone doing something different. It's like, oh my God, that can't be right. I've done 5 years at university and wait, he's got him out of pain. What do I do now? And so I don't really attach myself to ideas or information. I attach myself to the result of what we've done and has it had a positive or negative effect. I'm less interested in the literature. I don't give a stuff about the science. I don't give a stuff about individuals that their pre-existing thought processes as to who's influenced them. I'm only interested about the athlete, and the things that we're going to do right now and then over the next however long I work with that person, how we're going to change their body. So there's a lot of people who associate themselves to information, and it's like, okay, what if that information's imperfect and in 10 years time it's made to be seen imperfect because there's a new study that gets published? So take static stretching, as I said before, is that most individuals disregard stretching in general. It's probably the thing that's it's the most cost-effective thing you can do for your body to look after yourself. There is no real, what are they going to sell for stretching? A $15 rubber band and maybe the bandana that winds you out until your legs slowly open up. But besides that, they're really struggling to sell commercial pieces of equipment, which is why there is a lack of, science to support the use of static stretching. But now we've got individuals walking in a strength training environment and swinging their leg back and forth, and they think that's stretching. That's you're increasing the joint temperature, but you haven't actually increased the connective tissue length or tension. And if you haven't done that, then you may be compromised from a loading standpoint because you reduced range of motion, and the joint may be compromised. So if you attach yourself to ideas or thoughts, that might come back to bite you. And in the world that I live in with competitive athletes is if I attach myself to ideas or thoughts, that may significantly affect my ability for the athlete to achieve. Imagine being sitting back when you're older and going, if I hadn't thought like that and hadn't been so closed-minded, maybe my athlete might have won a gold medal, I could be the cause of that. So the world that I come from, I had 20 coaches who coach relatively high-level professional athletes, breaking down every single training decision. And if I just made a decision unconsciously as to, I got Corey doing this and this because currently in the industry it's popular. They'll go, why? Why'd you do that? There's more to it than just thinking, someone wrote a study and said that that's the best way to train, and I want to dive a little bit deeper than that, and that's I guess what I do is I break down those industry paradigms, and try and give the athlete the best opportunity by being detached to information in that regard. Yeah.
It's so relieving, as an athlete, hearing that as well. And it must get so distracting sometimes because you hear all of the noise. Yeah. And as you said, just focusing on one athlete.
Yeah.
Would be crazy. But dude, what actually motivates you to keep doing all this stuff and push you forward?
For me, coming from a competitive background and myself with cricket and sport growing up, is giving someone else the opportunity that maybe I lost through just the way that I trained myself. And then I never was injured, but in the sense of my career never stopped, but definitely the way that I trained may have influenced me. I look back now and I think that I could have had maybe a professional career that I should have had if I hadn't trained the way that I had. I remember being at national tournaments and going on the off days and going and training legs, and walking out nearly vomiting. That maybe has a problem with the way that I'm going to play the next day.
Closet bodybuilder problems.
Yeah, closet bodybuilder problems. So
why is this cricketer so jacked?
Basically, all the boys say you're always the last to leave the eating cafeteria area. And I'm like, But yeah, so if I give someone else the opportunity that maybe that I didn't have as a result of the way that I thought at the time, that inspires me to change someone's ability in that regard. And I want to see people have 20, 30 year careers where they don't have any injuries. It sounds pretty hectic that's possible, but it is possible. It's the level that you decide to go to understanding the athlete's needs. And
I shouldn't say this on the podcast, but no one go see Nick because I'm seeing Nick. You else, he's got a wait list and stuff. All right, guys, I'm first on there. God damn.
Yeah, it's getting crazy like that, and it's cool because obviously, the word of mouth is the most powerful. And in the absence of being associated to a facility or a particular brand or a company and having people wanting to come to you, you get to find out how good you are in that regard. And it is cool that that's had a gradual effect as I've begin to transition from sort of run-of-the-mill personal trainer to then studying under my mentors and then going to do some physical therapy study and then being able to sort of control a full athlete's preparation. It's sort of, I always was inspired to work with athletes because that's where I came from, and working with general population is fantastic. They have their challenges because some athletes or some general population clients don't necessarily understand, all the variables that are necessarily required of them to apply. But, you get some really great general population because they're less emotionally attached to information. A lot of athletes come with a lot of pre-existing mental, thoughts with the way that they should train. They've been in an environment since 15, 16 years old, high performance, and they've been told that they're fantastic, and then the way that they've trained declined them, they still think that, hey, I've still got to train that way. So it's hard at times to try and work with both, but it is rewarding when you get people who come in with an empty cup and they lose attachment to ideas and thoughts, and they just think, hey, with me and my body right now and my intuition, what can I do to change my current situation? And then my influences. Most athletes, you know more about your body than I will ever know, but me giving you the tools to understand how consciously competent you can be with your own body is a whole nother story. So every single person I come into contact with, it's a new learning experience. Every single person that I influence is still going to be a new learning experience because we don't know what's going to happen. This bullshit paradigm of functional training that's come to light. There is no such thing as functional training. I don't understand how something's going to be applied to you until I've done it. If I give you a training program, we find out whether it was functional or not. But me saying to you whether something was functional before you've done it, it's kind of irrelevant. I can have a pre-existing thought that I think, hey, Corey goes and applies this, that might influence the shoulder to be, in a bit better of a place. But we don't find out if it transferred until you've done it. So this whole myth, these individuals writing the books on functional training, they should move to Canada where it's legal.
I was just saying there.
But, like in the sense of, they perhaps need to consider their thought around, the decisions as when an athlete runs down the field, people writing books on unilateral training. Unilateral training is a fantastic paradigm that's been, developed. But, when an athlete runs down the field, how long do they have their foot on the ground for? It's a split second. So if we add a large load to that single leg exercise, we may be declining their ability to transfer to this sport. Differentiate that between bodybuilding is bodybuilding athletes, they might have, asymmetrical imbalances that using unilateral training is more relevant for, but we can't just go unilateral. But we also can't fix unilateral issues with just bilateral work, meaning two-legged for people who are listening. Two-legged work and one-legged work, unilateral is one-legged and two-legged is bilateral. And so there is a need for unilateral work, but my belief is that the way that unilateral training is being done is the thought that everything needs to be heavily loaded. The attachment to load is a big problem. I'm more interested in how the athlete lifts the load than necessarily the load that they're using. And unless you're in the strength sports, weightlifting and powerlifting, the way they lift the load is kind of irrelevant for every other athlete. And so unfortunately, as most teams, unless you lift the load, you don't get selected in a lot of teams. And that's a big problem because now we've got athletes who will go down to the bottom of a squat or move into a deadlift or move into an Olympic lift, and they lose control of the pelvis and they lose control of the shoulder in a press or whatever it is. And now they go into the field, and when they're running on the sports field, why is that pelvis flapping around like a barnyard door? I'm not sure. And that's what's happening, So if we decline them the way that we train, now a powerlift is a little bit different. I might have a different set criteria for a strength sport, whereas the athlete's probably going to lose his shape at some point. But perhaps in his rest of his training year, we influence that shape by ensuring that we have sort of a bit of an insurance policy. But a powerlifter will be like to me, Nick, I don't give two stuffs about what my pelvis is doing. I'm just worried about how much load I lift. But if you're increasing your rate of anterior rotation, your pelvis is no longer in the position that it should be to optimize your load that you're then going to lift, you may have reduced nerve supply down your leg. That may be a consideration that you want to make from a load output perspective. So I believe every athlete, no matter what sport, what discipline, what activity they're involved in, if you change the level of dysfunction they have in their body, you may be influencing their ability. If we don't do that, we may be opening the door for tragedy in that regard as well.
Dude, crazy. What about for building muscle?
So for hypertrophy, so there's this thought in the bodybuilding world that, you ever heard a bodybuilder say, injuries just happen in bodybuilding. I've got stuffed elbow, I've got stuffed knees, I've second hip replacement. Why? Why does it happen in bodybuilding? What's the relevance of an injury in bodybuilding? Think about the sport. It's literally the most controlled environment.
Yeah, it's the most.
There is no need for any injury to happen. And the reason injuries happen in bodybuilding, it's like a petrol engine versus a diesel. A diesel slowly, it's like a slow steam train. It slowly blows up over time, whereas a petrol engine goes bang. And that's the difference between running sport and bodybuilding. Is bodybuilding is more like a diesel engine. And so bodies and bodybuilding, they tend to slowly decay because the position of the joints slowly change. And as a result of the decisions that the athletes made over a period of time, take Aaron, for example. Aaron's probably one of the most, if not currently the best bodybuilder in Australia, right? The individual, he had, 15 years of strength training prior to coming to me, had large amounts of internal rotation. He had basically shoulder issues where the subacromial space is reduced over time due to the dominance of horizontal pushing, and also he had larger dominance in his upper trapezius than his lower traps, and if you looked at his physical body, if you've seen a picture of his upper trap development versus his lower trap development, and then also with what we've done in the last 18 months, you'll see the changes he's made from a development perspective just as a result of reversing his decisions. And so bodybuilders tend to think that they just have to see a muscle and they have to grow it. But you being specific in the short term, trying to grow your biceps, might then in the long term negatively affect your ability to grow your biceps. Likewise for your legs, if you've been really specific, hey, I want to have bigger quads, cool, try be more specifically quads, but you just placing more volume in that area may have a longer lasting effect, and now you change the position of the bones, now you're actually decreasing your ability to create hypertrophy in that area. So if we decline the way we function as a result of the way that we train from a decision-making perspective, now we may be hindering our ability to better grow from a hypertrophy perspective. So, and that's a very individual specific type of conversation, because not everyone's going to present the same things. But if you look at most bodybuilders, what do most bodybuilders do on a Monday or Tuesday? They press. Chest day, International Chest Day. So, most bodybuilders will train chest on a Monday, probably quads on a Tuesday, and then, they might get to Thursday, Friday, train back. And look at most bodybuilders. How many bodybuilders prioritize any hip hinge work, any work that trains the hamstring, the glutes, and extension? Aaron's a prime example. Aaron's got some of the biggest hamstrings in Australia. Very rarely did a hip extension exercise. And even if he did, you probably looked at him conventionally deadlifting, his shoulder-arm relationship would change and he would probably favour the quad in that lift, So what I mean by that is his trunk raised up first, and then as a result of his trunk raising up first, he actually took the emphasis off the posterior chain and placed it, the centre of gravity, to the back of the body, which then placed the load on the front of the leg, which then influenced the quad. So you couple quad training in the front of the week with his leg training, then couple the deadlift or the pattern that he perceives as being more hamstring and glute dominant, but then actually using more quad. So, and also, think about this think about a horizontal pushing. What's supporting you in a horizontal push? You got a back pad. In a rowing exercise, what have you got to support you? Maybe chest supported row, but outside of that, if you're not using a chest supported row, you've got no influence of anything supporting you in your position. So is the load potential maybe a factor? Yeah, I've probably got more load potential. What do you bench press?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, it used to be really big, and now it's not so big anymore. Regularly, I'll bench press like probably 120 or 130.
Okay. What do you think you could bent over a row without having any movement or momentum or having any swing and maintaining a horizontal trunk angle?
Honestly, like 40 kilos.
Yeah, probably. So there's a massive difference between the load potential of those two exercises. Now, if we don't reverse that in some way, back in the 80s and 90s, they used to think that the back was the back, and if you did it, you could choose whether you did a pull down or a row. You could choose between the two. And then there was a little bit of education around the lines of movement. And that's where Ian came up with the concept of horizontal pulling, and people used to just lean back and they get a little bit of both on the pull down. But before, after that thought process, then they decided that, hey, maybe there is a relevance of doing more horizontal pulling work. But if the athlete's shape's being compromised, we then deteriorate their ability from a hypertrophy standpoint. So if the athlete doesn't deadlift, the upper back load potential is even further declined, because if the athlete's not deadlifting, they're never experiencing similar loading to what they're bench pressing. So you've got a dominance with already bench pressing, already probably in a working environment which favours the horizontal pushing musculature. Now we look at the shoulders. I tend to look at an athlete and go, the rate of deterioration in their shoulder shows how long they've strength trained for. If I feel an athlete's back and it feels like some sort of BMX track, it tends to be sort of a reflection as to how long they've trained. And a bit similar downstream, if we see, a bit of a skate ramp in the lower back. Like this Gold Coast City Council wanted to grab most people's lower backs and make skate ramps out of them. They could, because that's the way they've strength trained, you know. And so we've seen the positioning of most people's pelvis as a result of not only life influence, and most people, you know, if most people didn't shrink train, they just went throughout life and didn't really do a lot of heavy lifting and stuff like that, and maybe worked an office job, they could probably get through most of their life without having a knee or hip or back, you know, major surgery. But the way we strength train enhances the imbalances and then magnifies them. So, you know, you take don't sue me, CrossFit. Take CrossFit, for example. You know, there's going to be retirement villages specially built for them in the future, you know, because it's going to really be you've taken a lot of randomized training. You put it in an environment where fatigue is at its highest, and this is the same for cross-training environments, where fatigue is at its highest, and the usefulness of the way we lift the load is the way the body adapts. So if I watch you do a squat, and as a result of you now squatting and your pelvis starts to change, you're adapting to that way that you're now, you know, lifting the load. And the greater the load we have, the greater the breakdown will be. You know, so if I want to deteriorate an athlete, hey, let's mix strength training methods with endurance-based methods, and then monitor the rate of decline, you know. And that's what's happening in most training environments with minimal education around how to do that. And I'm sorry, form is not the last variable to injury. Form is one of the last lines of defense for injury, but the decisions around what we prioritize is a greater, you know, discussion. So do you think most, you know, cross-training environments are teaching people how to use their posterior chain and use to, you know, brace their abdominals and prioritizing more rowing than pushing? Probably not. But look at those majority of those people that are going into office working environments and what they do most of the day. They sit in this position, you know, shorten hip, you know, shorten anteriorly at the front of their upper body, and then they're going to this training environment doing 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 squats, you know? So it's pretty, when you sit back and look at it, you start to go,
Stop explaining my routine, man.
Yeah.
Well, what about the people that do that literally, like in the CrossFit realm? You do see some people out there, some athletes, which are crushing it with the endurance and crushing it with the strengths. Are they just more aware and they understand programming better? Like, yeah,
there's also a genetic tolerance, you know, so that individuals, depending on their hormonal levels and also, you know, their past influence and what they've done prior, may have a greater ability to withstand, you know, certain training for a longer period. It doesn't mean that they're not going to eventually, like the saying is, little leopards become big leopards and big leopards bite, you know, and that sense is that, you know, if an athlete continues to do something for a long period of time, it's like take a golfer, for example. I've got a number of golfers that, you know, one's as young as 15 and she's going really well. Now, she come to me with pre-existing conditions of 3 disc bulge. Now,
what?
3 disc bulges
at 15?
At 15 years old.
What?
Yeah, and it was doing strength training, you know, prior to the injury. So that's a concern. As you know, you used to get a back injury, you used to have to do, to get rotational imbalances. Withdraw that statement. To get rotational imbalances, you used to have to literally play golf or a sport with a rotational influence. Now we just have to do trendy weight training exercises. You know, we just have to swing a kettlebell a certain way, or you know, a sledgehammer or whatever they use in a lot of cross training environments. You know, so with rotational imbalances, if we want to speed the rate of decline up, we just, you know, rotate with load. You know, so for an athlete who like a golfer who may have the influence of going one way for a constant period of time, we might have to swing the club the other way at some point. You know, not in the sport, but maybe outside of the sport. You know, maybe in the training environment, if the right-handed golfer is constantly swinging one way, we might have to, you know, swing a few left-handed. Same if a freestyle swimmer goes in and his event is freestyle and swimming. If he's not doing backstroke at some point, then goes in the training environment and starts bench pressing, he's in trouble. You know?
So what are, just like from my mind where I tick in, is I always kind of think of things like next action steps. I'm like, what is like a sort of a tool in terms of thinking for, like, you know, because obviously, as you mentioned, everything's super individual, but what is like some of like your sort of favorite, you know, exercises and stuff? Because obviously the programming's so important, but what are some things that you find commonly that you're like?
In the first 3 months, most athletes that come to me would have to earn their right to go back to prioritize quad and horizontal pushing work. You know, so they have to earn the right, and even then they might have some time in the saddle to reverse. You know, I tend to sort of have a bit of a joke with a lot of athletes that come to me and they go, we look at their programming, we see about 10 quad exercises and I see about 1 hamstring glute, you know, posterior exercise. And I tend to laugh and I say, oh, so you'll be sweet if we go 10 hamstring glute exercises and 1 quad exercise for the next year. And I look at them and they go, So okay, no worries. We'll fix it slow. We'll go 5. You know,
Man, may I interrupt you there?
Yeah.
Because that exact same thing happened to me when I was training. I remember back in the day, I would literally only do like hamstrings after quad training. And this was on my first bodybuilding competition. I was like 21.
Yeah.
And I had to stop training quads for a whole year. I said to myself, I keep getting injuries with stuff. Just in my knees started hurting. And I just stopped. And I just trained hamstrings.
Yeah.
For an entire year. I was like, I need to catch them up.
Yeah.
And then like after that year, they've been so much better.
Yeah.
But that was like at early 20s. And I was like, so I was a prime example of what you were just saying.
So relatively unconsciously, you know, you were relatively competent in understanding that maybe I'm compromised, you know?
Dude, so compromised. Well, I got told in the bodybuilding comps, you got no hamstrings.
It's a good way to get an athlete to go train their hamstrings. Yeah. Like, problem is there's a lot of influence of knee flexion dominant hamstring work. You know, there's a lot of influence in the market, particularly around running sport athletes, to do a lot of knee flexion hamstring work. And I don't tend to think that a lot of the hamstring strains are coming from a lack of knee flexion tension. And what I'm saying is Nordic drops and hamstring curls, and that's all great. But if we look up a bit higher and we look at the positioning of the hips and we look at the force couple relationship that the pelvis is meant to be held within, using the, you know, if the posterior rotation is influenced by the abdominals and the gluteals, and now as a result of the amount of hip flexion work we've done from the quad training, we've prioritized, now the pelvic position's left the building, so to speak, is they may be compromised from a shape, but we're not prioritizing hip extension work. You know, and I refer back to Aaron, for example, is he never had in his entire bodybuilding career done any hip extension work, or knee flexion, or hamstring curls.
So it's basically
he
just
used to do seated and lying hamstring curl, and that was it.
Yeah. So essentially, like, it's hip extension exercises, stiff-legged deadlifts. And
yeah, as a result. And the way that you lift the deadlift is a big influence as well.
Yeah.
If you change your trunk angle early in the pull, you know, these individuals doing a sumo deadlift because they feel compromised and they think that they can't. You know, do you ever heard an athlete say, I used to deadlift, but now I stuff my back, so I don't deadlift anymore?
Yeah.
How many people say that?
Dude,
Everyone.
so many.
Everyone.
I stuffed my back, I was deadlifting, but I just deadlift again.
Yeah, and then it's like, but the thing is that it's because the deadlift notoriously is taught poorly. You know,
exactly.
They don't know how to deadlift correctly. They don't know how to maintain the joint relationship, and the biggest contributor is the load. Everyone wants to lift heavier load, but they use the load in the absence of understanding their selective recruitment and maybe the position of certain joints when they lift the load. So if the deadlift is causing, you know, the athlete to be compromised, maybe you have to go down the food chain a little bit, and maybe, you know, go to isolated exercises before integrative exercises, such as, you know, just like exercises that selectively recruit the muscles that you're relatively not using the most of, you know. So it's sort of, that's a very individual. You can't just make a statement and say everyone should deadlift, but there's a statement to say that the deadlift work in the bottom first portion of the deadlift is really done very well. You know, most people, you know, place the load more to the back of their body, and they sit behind the bar, and then they use their quads, and then there's less transfer from that lift to a general population individual.
It's hard too.
And it's hard, you know, and it's hard especially when you're growing up, because all you want to do, and I've got videos, I've done, you know, I've, you know, got battle scars myself from my own past, and that's the way I've learned. As I'm not perfect, but in the regards to as you grow up and as you begin to understand, hey, the way that I'm training might be compromising me, I may need to change my technical model, you know, and over time you may be able to gradually, you know, increase your ability to be able to control and maintain that technical model with more load. But there's got to be a discussion around, is load a big variable? Is it the most important variable? And I don't think it is. You know, I think that there's a lot of other variables first, including selective recruitment, including the speed of movement that you move the bar, including the selective recruitment, and also the ability for you to control the load, and those factors may be more influential in your hypertrophy potential, particularly if you're a bodybuilder or just in a general population individual who's going to the gym regularly. May be more important variables for you to understand prior to then increasing the load, because in increasing the load, there's a disparity between when you increase load, obviously the repetitions go down, but your ability to be able to lift heavier load with maintaining a technical model that you want is also compromised. So it's a battle between, hey, how much load is good to be lifting. A lot of athletes come to me, and a lot of the time we're doing a lot of body weight stuff just to be able to understand the selective recruitment. You know, there's a series of control exercises that I was taught through my education and through my mentors, and anyone who's done that with me will acknowledge that they're very hard. They're not easy, and unfortunately, like take the single leg RDL. The single leg RDL was never intended to be loaded. It was never a loaded exercise. But the Americans took it, and now it looks like a Texas oil rig, with the thing coming down and the other legs coming up. It's kind of like this. It was never intended to be loaded. But because the influence of everyone wants to lift heavy load, it was added, the back leg goes out the back door and then you tip over. So I would argue that load has probably had one of the most negative impacting effects on the way that most people train. And it's just the dominance of people's emotional attachment towards lifting heavy things, which is fine if you're wanting to be in the strength sports. I'm not saying that you shouldn't lift heavy load, but there may be a time in the annual year, even in the strength sports, if you're a powerlifter, it's only specific to you to lifting the heaviest load when your competition
when you're competing,
is. So there may be a part of the year outside of the year. I've got a strongman currently, a pro strongman, and he'll be the first to admit the sessions that we have, he'll genuinely struggle with a quarter, not even a quarter, even more, a tenth of the weight that he would usually pull in a deadlift in a competition meet. He was really amused with his inability to be able to control his own body weight. Yet this guy can pull 380, 400 kilo. It's just like, but perhaps when we come back to pulling that load, now he has a greater ability to be able to control the load and also has a bit more of an insurance policy on his joints. He might not blow apart, so.
Bro, I just had such a thought just run through my mind. I'd love to see your thought on this.
Yeah.
It sort of makes sense for me, for example, for the people in the bodybuilding industry who want to be extremely lean and extremely healthy and all those things, who get to the end of the competition phase. This is anyone who really wants to get lean. They go, I need to train heaps more. I need to do all this stuff. It's like, I just thought then, well, instead of training then, it's like spend the off season training your hardest to put on muscle. And then when you're coming to a stage where you want to get leaner, it's like back off all the training load. Would you agree or not agree with that?
I think that comes back to an individual's periodization model for the year. Yeah. But in saying that, is what you're saying is true to an extent, because an athlete should, even in their competition phase for their bodybuilding, there should be a time where we be specific. So if you've got a generalized year, say for example an annual year, you've got generalized phase, a specific phase, competitive phase, and a transition phase. So in the generalized phase, say for example you present to me with, you've got a dominance for more internal rotation. If we prioritize more chest in the short term, we may decline our ability in the long term. I might say, Corey, you're competing in March next year. What I want to do is I want to reverse the prioritization of you training your chest so much in the short term, and we may place it to the end of the week and we may reduce the amount of volume in that area. But as a result, when we go to be more specific, say at the end of this year, maybe in September, October, leading into the final stages of getting ready to start to prepare yourself to compete, we can then increase our level of specificity. We can be more specific for you wanting to train your chest, because you might say, hey, that's an area I want to be my best on stage, or that's an area that I want to look the best. But if we go too specific in the short term, we actually become less specific in the long term. So it's kind of like, hey, if we, as I explained at some individuals, if there's a door you can walk through and there's two doors, and if you walk through the door that gives you the things instantly that you want, you kind of lock the other door. Whereas if you walk through the door, maybe that's a bit boring in the short term, but in the long term, as a result of walking through that door first, now you have access to both. So being too specific in the short term may lead to being less specific long term, and possibly even less specific, because then you're injured as a result of training your emotional attachment towards certain things more so than other things. Yeah, it's an interesting, and there's a bigger continuum on that for athletes involved in running sport. How many athletes run in a straight line for a very long time?
There's not many, but you get the marathoners and the
marathoners as an example.
Bad boys that'll get out there.
Yeah, I don't know how they do that. But take multi-directional sport. Take AFL, rugby league, rugby union. Take those big three as an example. Even cricket, you go to that example. Is how long do they consistently run in a straight line for a long period of time? Not very long. How long does a cricketer run for when they chase a ball on the infield? Maybe 20 to 30 meters. When a bowler runs up and delivers the ball, how long is he running for? Well, my run up was 20 meters, and I'd struggle to do that these days. But if I was to run in and bowl 6 deliveries off a 20 meter run up, that's still not that much, training volume. It's not a lot of volume, and it's not a lot of consistent running. My run up will take me 5 seconds to get to the crease and deliver the ball. A rugby league player, positional wise, there's different requirements positionally. In rugby league is a second rower, his running ability or his length of time he needs to run for, it might be different to a center or an outside back, but the requirement for the athlete for being specific is a little bit different. But in terms of being specific from a running perspective is how many athletes need to run in a straight line for a long period of time. But yet look at what athletes do in the off season. They go run the hills, they go run the streets, they run long distances. My argument is for that is speed requires a larger degree of specificity, meaning that I don't want an athlete to break down at all when they run. Because if we increase the volume of their running, we're going to see a greater reduction of ability to be able to run well. So Charlie Francis is a great Canadian sprint coach. He coached Ben Johnson. 250 Canadian records, 32 world records, and I think 19 Olympic medals, I think it was. He quoted that anything over 500 meters total volume of work becomes an endurance session, not a speed session. Think about how many athletes do a Bronco or a beep test. Think about those as requirements of this sport and trying to train or training a speed session. Most people in those speed sessions are running upwards of, 3-4 kilometers. So their adaptation towards the way their training speed has now actually been an endurance session. And furthermore, athletes running on sand, you may be declining their ability to be able to run well on the other surfaces. But yeah,
that's crazy.
It's a few variables.
Well, what would you say to people? Or let me rephrase this question. What is the most important thing for people to know in regards to injury prevention?
It's a big question. It's a big question because there's many layers to that in itself. But even comparing function to dysfunction, comparing discomfort to pain, there's most individuals walking around daily life have a level of dysfunction that they're not aware of in their body. They aren't conscious that they currently have a problem, right? And me included in that is everyone has a dysfunction in their body that if you can try and change or try and mitigate, they'll feel better about it. So my biggest statement to most people would be to try and identify before an injury happens, or just be proactive in understanding that maybe there's things that you could be doing in your current routine, in your current activity. And it's not as if it's not being done, because everyone knows that they probably should be doing some sort of activation. Everyone knows they probably should be getting tension reduction work or soft tissue work on a regular basis. By the time that you think, probably should go get a massage, you probably need 2. By the time you think you probably should deload, you probably needed 1-2 weeks ago. Everyone knows that there's things that they could be doing, but the way that the prioritization of on a continuum, the things that most of us are doing that we probably could be doing more of and probably doing less of other things. I take some recovery, things, for example, is look at static stretching and looking at foam rolling on a continuum is for a professional athlete, say they've got 20 hours a week they can devote to their recovery. A general population individual who goes to the gym 4 times a week, they might have 2 hours a week they can dedicate to their recovery. Of all the things that we could be doing in that time, what's generally the most prioritized for most people? I'll go get a treatment. Okay, fantastic. Treatment's a fantastic way of mitigating some issues. It's the quickest way to change an issue, in my opinion, depending on what the treatment is. I feel as though on a continuum of what most people prioritize, I think massage, soft tissue work is probably the king of all. Getting hands-on therapy is the king of all things.
Really quickly, why?
Because I think it has the fastest way to change the condition of tension and tissue. You can actually change the ability to change someone's joint relationship through changing the health of the connective tissue surrounding the joints. I think it has the quickest effect. Then probably, after that, stretching. Having someone do partner assisted stretching, or you doing a solid stretching session yourself. When I say a solid stretching session, that's not just lying on your back and half on your phone or in between sets putting your arm up against the squat rack and going, yep.
You should be crying while you stretch.
Yeah, you should be genuinely stretching as hard as you train and really trying to change the health of the connective tissue surrounding the joints. And then I'd go down further, dry needling, maybe cupping, acupuncture, that sort of stuff. And then, your recovery pools and et cetera, et cetera. But generally the most commercially biased things that most people are doing is the things that we see at the recovery centers and the things that seem to be an easy incentive to pay money for, and I tend to think that those things, they might feel good, they might be great in the short term, but are they doing enough in the long term with the time that you have? If you're a pro athlete, fantastic, go do those things. But if you're a general pop who has 2 hours, you should be stretching, you should be rolling, you should be getting massage. Those are the king of changing your health of your body, in my opinion, the health of the connective tissue surrounding joints and the joint positioning. And then looking at the way that you train and maybe rationalizing in your own head before seeking some other individuals or professionals' help. Is there things in my program that I may need to consider its influence and why it's in there? Am I just doing it because once upon a time a personal trainer told me that's a great exercise? Or am I doing it because I understand maybe as to why I'm doing that maybe might be influenced by knee pain or my shoulder pain or whatever I'm doing? So before I discuss an individual specific needs, you need to understand is what is my allowance for time on that person and how much time can they actually devote to doing certain things, and then the prioritization of devotion as to what I do. So for example, is if an athlete's being compromised, they only can do 2 sessions a week. Say for example, you've led with, for the last 10 years in your strength training, you've led with more horizontal push and more quad dominant work, and I say, well, look, Corey, you've got 3 sessions you can train per week. That's what you've told me. And in those sessions, you've got a total of 90 minutes. The priorities that I want to have around that 90 minutes is I should have 45 minutes of soft tissue and stretching in that session. And I should have 45 minutes of prioritizing the weakest link within my training decisions. So it's the opposite in that case particular, it's the opposite. So horizontal pulling and hip dominance of hamstring and glute work, and involving activation of the abdominals and other things in there. So rather than just thinking, hey, what's the current industry paradigms telling me I should be prioritizing? What is my current history and what do I need to do for me?
Dude, that's so important, because I find myself with all my training programs and stuff as well, as I fall back into just old routines and old programs as well. You start going to, because this was fun and I really like this. And it's like hard to consciously pull yourself out of that. So that was like really important.
I guess it's having a little bit less of an attachment to, obviously there has to be a fun component of training. You can't lose the fun.
Save it to the end. It's the same thing. Like save your steak till last. A good bit of food is the same thing with your training.
Exactly. Like you still got to enjoy it. And I'm not trying to say that people should just remove the enjoyment factor just because, but maybe there might be a larger thing to look at there is in the short term, yes, it's fun and it's great. But in the long term, now you can't do anything because of the nagging knee pain that you have, Do you think it is important for everyone to train, and why? I think it's important to train, but I think it's important to have an understanding as to what you're training and maybe if it's having a significant impact on the way that your body is now operating. I think it's important that everyone looks after their bodies in ways that, increases their golden year ability, when they're in their later years. My goal in life is to get to the box and not have to give the surgeon any joints. If I do that, I'm pretty happy. But I think that should be most people's other, goal as well, is if they can get through life and improve their quality of life as a result of the things I've done in the previous years, and people don't understand they have control over those things. They have a lot more control than what they think. But often a lot of people sort of unconsciously are aware that they don't understand that the things they're doing actually have a greater influence than they're aware of. Until pain hits and they go, I've got pain, I don't know why,
Yeah. Here's a good question, and that is, what in your career with everyone that you've worked with, like, what do you think is like the most like the worst injury that you've seen that you've fixed, that you've been like, whoa, like this was pretty hectic when this person come to me, and this is where they are now. I'd love to know the story.
Yeah,
how you felt about
there's
it.
There's a few there, to be honest.
The one that sticks out.
Any major back injury is a big one to come back from.
What?
Any bulge, disc bulge, any protrusion, anything that's disc herniation, anything like that is a massive one and it's a credit to any athlete to come back from.
Please tell me a story.
I've got multiple golfers and I've got multiple individuals that are involved in like cricket and stuff like that. And you would think that the way their health, their life, their everything that they, the current situation that they're in, you'd think that, they'll never come back and play again. I've had a recent story of a lady, Georgia Lindbrook. She's a professional golfer. Her career was done in her eyes, in her opinion. She came to me last October. Couldn't swing a golf club, had back pain. Was going to get her another nerve block because she thought that was the only thing that she'd get through her daily life. She's back on the pro circuit currently, so she's playing again.
How does it make you feel to do that to someone, bro?
It's pretty cool. It is pretty cool to
It must be overwhelming a little bit, like, holy, like.
Yeah, I think it's, again, the credit shouldn't come back to me though, because I think that I have a set of tools that I have available to me to be able to break an athlete down and work out as to the flaws within the current approach. But it still 100% the influence of the athlete, whether they take that step. Another example was, a big one that most...
But you got the tools, man. Let's say you do have the tools. And like, I appreciate you for having them, because it makes, like, as a professional athlete myself, it makes you feel like supported. It's like, someone's got my back and I can go somewhere, because as someone who's trying to you're just focused on the doing all the time. Like, it takes so much time and energy. It's like when you see the pro people doing all this stuff, it's nuts. And a lot of them, like myself, I own a business at the same time for that as well. It's crazy. So it's like trying to do everything and then like focusing on your own stuff. Something, what do I do? So
overwhelming. Yeah.
Thank you for having all the tools and learning all the stuff. Man.
I think, even not having all the tools or having all the tools, it doesn't matter. It's either if I don't know, we're going to find out, and taking that approach is, some athletes will ask me, what do you think's going on? I go, I don't know. We're going to find out though. That's the difference. I take, there's a reason my initial appointments are 3 to 4 hours long, is because sometimes, the other day I had a young rugby league player come and we went for 5.5 hours, and that was one appointment, and that's sometimes what it takes is sometimes in the world that I am involved in helping bodies, it takes longer than a 60-minute appointment, and in some cases, some people will do less than that. I don't fit in the industry paradigm of, hey, I'm going to see 20 people a day, and in that process, I'm going to try and touch as many people as possible and try and help as many people as possible. I want to help the person that I have in that moment, and if they leave and we haven't done what we set out to do, they have to come back the next day. I've had cases where I've spent a whole day with one individual, and I've said to my subsequent appointments, I've got someone I need to spend a little bit more time with. Are we okay to reschedule? And a lot of people appreciate, they get it, and because that's what just needs to be done at some point. And, that's not saying that everyone can fit into that same mold, because not everyone has the same requirements and the same needs. Whereas this particular person was a rugby player who was very close to his competitive season, coming up season, and needed a lot of work, in my opinion, and he needed to understand how compromised he really was going into competitive season. He didn't have any injuries as such, but was going to have some if he wasn't careful. So, me influencing that person in a short period of time, when he needs to understand that, going into the competitive season, he will see a problem if he doesn't address it, So, everyone has imbalances. Everyone has things within their bodies that if you can influence in a positive way, may have a better career, may have a better end of life experience, may have a better, and that's my job is putting the athlete first, and in the absence of wanting gratification for that, or wanting to be seen as the most important part of that, is a lot of coaches get caught up on getting accolades for what they do, rather than understanding, well, what they do is what they're meant to do. That's their job. They're meant to identify these things. They're meant to help the athlete.
Dude, I think as well, like, seriously, like, I just have this little philosophy of my own. It's like, okay, so from especially the age of early 20s and teenagers until when you car cut, is essentially, it's like prime time. And one thing that all people that are older are jealous of people that are in their 20s to 50s is their bodies. And I find like our bodies are so important. And I always say this thing like with people, because I've worked with some pretty high level business owners and interviewed quite a few, and they say like, man, young people put so much pressure on themselves to make money and succeed, but you're going to make all of it when you're older. What you've got now is your body, and that's what we're jealous of. So I'm always saying, like, this is my Lamborghini now. Even for the young people who do have Lamborghinis out there, you have another Lamborghini, and you're wearing it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's
a special piece of kit.
It is. And it's so critical, I think, which where you come in is, like, not only you're doing stuff, but you're teaching people about their bodies. Like, because we don't know. We just know the feelings.
Yeah.
But we don't know all the stuff. And I think it's so important to learn about your body on such a really critical, deep level. Because if I just ask anyone listening to this, how much do you know about your body? Probably like, well, no, this thing's sore. Or this. How much do you truly know about your body? Because this is it.
Yeah.
This is all we got. Like this is all we have. And it's like, I think it's essential that not just athletes and not just people who are training to the gym, but everyone should know as much as possible about their bodies as they can.
And that's the thing is this is where I argue with a lot of the way the industry's gone in the last 10 to 20 years is there's a larger influence of online work. And that's fantastic that now we are able to work with a variety of people in a variety of locations. But, you know, when most programs are about as individualized as my cappuccino order, you know, it's really, we're not doing enough justice to help those individuals the way they should be helped, you know? So there's a larger need for assessment. There's a larger need for understanding or allowing the athlete, you know, this morning, there was a young lady in Melbourne. She was going to get some physical therapy, and I had to have a voice call with a physical therapist to influence and help him understand as to what he needs to treat to help our situation, you know? So unless you're actively involved and really hands-on, even when you can't be hands-on, you know, it's challenging because sometimes there's just not enough being done for a lot of people. And then they go, I work with this individual and, you know, now I'm broken for it. It's like, well, there's two reasons for that. It's because you were really unconscious to what that individual was prioritizing for you. And now as a result of you being unconscious, you've got yourself to thank and him to thank or her to thank now that you're broken or now that your career's over or whatever it is, you know. And for a lot of people, and particularly in running sport, is, you know, if you've got a professional contract in the NRL, you know, it matters, but it doesn't really matter because you can be replaced, you know. So a lot of players get thrown to the wayside and they're constantly trying to rehab, they're constantly trying to recover, you know, and it's just the reality is that, you know, they'll just find another person, but your career is now done, you know. So there's just not enough being done, and like you said, you know, your body is your Lamborghini, but it's like not taking the Lamborghini to get serviced all the time. You know?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
It's still a car. It's still going to explode at some point.
Just taking it on the track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like you've got it's a bit of give and take, and it's also just trying to raise the awareness of the athlete, developing a bit more conscious competence over the things that they're doing daily and how that may compromise them. You know, so the influence of what they do and when they do it, the lifestyle implications, the sporting influence, and now the way that we train. And if we take more control and understand those variables, we may have a greater ability to be able to influence the athlete or the individual, you know, even if it's just getting to work and being able to work through your whole day without having pain or discomfort. You know, that might be a win. You know, there's different levels of wins for certain different people. Someone might want an Olympic gold medal. Someone might want to be able to get through their day at work without having pain in the neck. You know, so it is, but it comes down to your willingness to, you know, it is a long road to assessing someone's body and trying to prevent someone from having injury. It is a long road, but it is doable. And it's just understanding as to how influential the decisions of their past and their future are to making that approach doable for them.
Nick, how old are you, man?
I'm 26 this year, so...
That is crazy. And I swear everyone who is listening to this can also agree, like, you are a master of your craft. I'm not saying that. You're a guru. I know you say not yet, but there's you know, you go
I'll
black
let you know
belts.
when I am.
You go black belts and grandmasters and stuff like that. But already, man, I can tell that you've spent so much time, energy and effort and intention and thinking and all that stuff. Like, it's quite genius, man. Like, you are a master currently of what your stuff is, deserves a respect. And dude, like, seriously, where can people find you?
I appreciate it. I don't know if I'm on the guru level yet, but maybe.
You're well on your way. You're master level, bro. You are master. You're getting there. God damn.
Currently, I'm at a gym in Helensvale called Iron Asylum. I have an office located there, but I also work online with a lot of people, and I can do that in a capacity where, you know, we make the best of what I say sometimes is a bit of a shitty situation. We can't be in the physical presence, but we do have the ability as long as the athlete's willing. You know, my mentor Ian back in the 80s and 90s had athletes competing in, you know, he was working with the American Olympic ski team, the Canadian Olympic ski team via fax. You know, this is 2022. If we can't influence athletes, you know, in a way this day and age, you know,
fax me, bro.
Yeah, fax me. I'm going to send you a fax. So you know, like, yeah, we have the ability. So I often get that. Oh, do you know anyone that's located in Melbourne, or do you know anyone that's located in Texas, or you know, whatever it is? And it's like, no, I don't. That does, and they often say, oh, that does what you do, and I go, I don't even know what I do. You know, I'm just in the business of helping people, and you know, to define exactly what I do is a really weird thing. People often ask me, "Oh, you're a physical therapist? Are you a physio?" No.
It's like you're a human
I'm just
body
a coach.
optimizational coach.
I'm just a coach. There's a lot smarter people out there than me, and there's a lot of people who know a lot more elaborate words. And my job is relatively simple. You know, my job is simple. All we have to do is try and put the athlete's body first. And I have a pretty, you know, I'm pretty obsessive mindset. You know, people know when they work with me, I'm pretty obsessed with making a situation better. You know, and it does keep me up at night. If a problem is nagging and it's causing problems, I get pissed off, you know, so I take it directly personally as if someone's compromised.
You want you on your side, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Get on my side, bro.
Yeah. And so, that helps with the psychology of the individual, is because they feel as though, you know, for the first time, they've actually got someone that wants to genuinely help and wants to increase their ability. And that might be the difference between taking someone from a bronze medal to a gold medal, or winning a trophy, or just, you know, getting through life without having, you know, feeling like they're going nowhere, or whatever it is having someone to genuinely, like, because back pain for some people, or lower body pains, or aches and niggles can really be debilitating for a lot of people. It can really make,
you down, man.
Get you down
here.
Yeah. And it's taking away the thing that we should be able to do the most, which is move. And you know, so for a lot of people, it's a combination. You know, you go to your doctor, you get pain meds, and then you just go in that circle, and then you never get out of that circle. You're constantly just going back for medication. Then you get thrown to the surgeon. The surgeon goes, oh, well, we'll do this, and you come out and you have rehab, and you're still in the same situation 6 months later. You know, so for some people, they never fall out of that loop. Once my doctor goes to me, you know, oh, would you want me to send you some referrals? And I says, mate, the people that come for pain medication probably isn't the type of person that I want. No disrespect to people that go for pain medication, but you're not looking at the big picture. You're not identifying the things that I've done that have influenced me to be in this situation. You know, and maybe that's just, if I was to highlight that to them, they might be aware. But generally speaking, people want a quick fix, and these things aren't a quick fix. You know, you didn't hurt your knee overnight. You know, there's been a pre-existing. People think, you know, how did I hurt my knee? Oh, just, you know, on the weekend I was throwing a footy around. No, it wasn't just that you're throwing a footy around on the weekend. It was that it was a pre-existing condition to that knee. And now, as a result of you throwing the footy around, you hurt it, you know? So, you know, you didn't just hurt it just kicking a ball around, you know?
Too crazy. What's your social media?
Coachnickmccallum is my Instagram. That's probably the best place to, you know, follow me along. But yeah.
Sweet. I'll link all of those in the show notes below as well, man. Thank you heaps for coming onto the show.
I appreciate it.
One more question though is, I like to leave the show with like an action point for someone to do.
Yep.
So for all the listeners who are listening, I'd like you to challenge them. Just give them like one thing for them to do, either like this week or like today, this week for when they're listening. And just for them to take away of being like, actually, is it do something, listen to something, look at something, implement, just like one thing for them to do to challenge them. What would you encourage them to do?
My challenge point would be doing the thing that most people do the least of, which is go stretch. You know, start looking after your body. Start going and actually taking care of yourself in a way that, you know, your body's going to thank you for the latter. You know, do it with the intent to actually change something. Don't just stretch and think you've ticked the box. Have I actually changed myself in that situation? Is probably the biggest thing for me is not enough people stretch, and it's the quickest, the easiest, the most cost effective thing that you can be doing right now that can change most of the issues in your body.
Bro, you're an absolute stud. Thanks for coming on to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.